AI has changed everything, and that's not something to be scared of, but it's almost, conversations are almost more important now. The tools are really for the work. You need to protect the conversation so that you can bring the human element back.
Hi, I'm Sehaam Cyrene. Welcome to the Leaders Who Coach podcast. I teach you how to coach your team and get more from your conversations generally. I've been through an evolution with Leaders Who Coach, an AI one, that is actually making some amazing things possible, not least the cost of acquiring coach leadership skills and the way you can apply techniques real time in your very next meeting. Leaders Who Coach AI Enhanced, the self-paced course, is now available as a subscription. So when you're done here, check it out at leaderswhocoach.ai or coachlead.co. Both will get you there. Today, my guest is Dan Dunton, actually my very first graduate of Leaders Who Coach. So really lovely to have him on today. He is a program director in AI and transformation. He's got extensive experience in digital transformation, client account development, team leadership, and delivering complex tech-led programs. And before his current work in larger agency and transformation roles, he ran his own marketing and design consultancy. So there's a strong entrepreneurial spirit or drive there. He has a really personable and practical style of leading, as you're about to discover. Welcome, Dan.
Thanks, Ian. It's brilliant to be here. And hello, listeners.
Brilliant. So let's maybe back up a little bit to when we first met and you were looking for something. You were looking for some leadership development. Why don't you talk us through where you were at perhaps in your journey and what appealed to you about Leaders Who Coach?
Absolutely. And to cast my mind back, because it was back in 2019, I think we originally met, which was at a networking event. And if you think, the world has completely transformed since then. But what I was looking for at the time was really, I'd recently become a line manager. I'd taken on leadership responsibilities. And prior to that, I'd just been really delivering good work. So as with many people, they find themselves in a leadership position and they haven't yet really discovered how to unlock their style. I wasn't quite sure how best to approach this. I knew I needed to find that style and rhythm, but I hadn't yet discovered how. And what I didn't want to do is just model it on previous managers or from a book. And I think it was the first time we met at that networking that you said something about lead by asking, not telling. And it really sat with me and resonated. And that kind of led to further conversations. And obviously now we are here. So yeah, it's great to be here.
Yeah. Brilliant. And what would you say, aside from that shift or reframe about how you can show up? Because I think that's something lots of new leaders find themselves trying to figure out, what is my style? And they're not necessarily drawn to what they can see around them, but there isn't another way. So what would you say once you got started, perhaps have been the 2 or 3 things that have really stuck with you in terms of your practice of those skills?
Well, so there's probably 3 things that stand out, like key learnings, I'd say. They are, the first thing would probably be ask before jumping to solutions, because that was an absolute classic of mine. And it probably is, for lots of people, but it was, I guess, you know that you can provide an answer. You know that you can provide a solution, but the shift is really the role and your responsibility in that conversation, in that relationship. You're not really in charge of that anymore. That person really needs to come up with the answer. And so you have to guide them to that. And so for me, that was a big shift. And it was an adjustment in terms of my own style and way of operating.
Yeah.
So yeah, really good learning. And then the second one would probably be securing permission before sort of diving into talking about things, especially when it's a sensitive subject. I think without that, you're really just coaching at the person, not really with them. You're just talking at them and guiding them through your perspective. But actually, by getting them to allow you to do that, it opens up so much more. And the third one would be the listening element. I think I as many, it's easy to say that you listen, but do you listen properly? Do you really understand what they're saying? Or are you just replying? And by allowing space for the other person, by allowing silence and not being afraid of silence, you give that other person the opportunity to really open up. And that's where the truth comes. That's where the real stuff comes out. So that's what I found. And it was a real learning for me.
Yeah, well, those are among my favorites. I've got a lot of favorites, and they're usually favorites because of the stories that leaders come back and tell me about. I tried it and amazing stuff happened. And I think there is a lot of pressure on leaders to feel like they are responsible for the success of a team member. And I think just that's one of the hardest things. I think most leaders who go on the program have that same experience of wanting to give the solution, but really learning not to. Certainly not at the very start of the conversation, right? And then the securing permission, that might be a little strange one for people who are not used to that. How else might you describe or why that's important to secure that permission?
So examples around that would be, rather than ambushing the other person, if you've got a direct report and you're aware of a challenge that you need to talk about, can we talk about what just happened in that meeting? Just rephrasing how you talk to them just gives them the opportunity to just softens the conversation slightly and allows, I think, the truth to come out. But also the other thing is flipping it slightly. So if I was, I say, experimenting with how I'm going to work with a particular individual and actually I'm trying out a new agenda, or I'm running a workshop in a certain way, just being honest about that. I'm experimenting with these meetings. Can you tell me how it works, or tell me what works? And that helps, because then they feel like they're adding value to that conversation and it's not just a lecture.
And yeah, listening, we think we listen, but there's a lot going on here in our own heads, right? And so quietening that internal monologue and really just listening for the feelings, what things that people don't say, or the throwaway remarks. I mean, that's a classic, something that they throw out there but quickly move past, but actually turns out to be super important. Right? Super important to investigate.
I think as well, people sometimes prepare, other people are also preparing for the same meeting, and especially if they know what they're going to talk about. Yeah. But it's that silence at the end, when you've allowed for them to think about it in more detail, that's when the truth comes. They've reached the point of where they wanted to get to, but it's the bit afterwards that actually generates the most insight.
It's the bit afterwards, which is why the silence that you talked about, we feel uncomfortable about, don't we? We're not really, it's not how meetings typically run, holding that space, which somebody once counted. Another graduate said, it's literally, she counted it. She said it was like 17 seconds. That's kind of as long as she has to wait and hold that space for somebody before they then share the next most important thing.
And I think that's one of the hardest learnings for me actually was the silence. It just create that because it doesn't come naturally necessarily, and harder for some others. I still continually try and practice it because it would be easy to slip back into old habits.
Yeah, definitely. So tell me, since then, obviously you've gone into organizations and you've inherited teams, or you're building out teams and so on. How do you get to know your team members these days?
Yeah, that's a good question. So typically this kind of comes back to one of the principles really, which is to understand and to listen and not tell. So it's a whole, almost like doing a discovery in a project, but you're doing it with individuals. You're trying to understand how they operate, and how a team operates, not the org charts, not, how it's supposed to be, but actually how does it work in terms of team dynamics? What are individuals good at? How do they work with each other? And what do they want to get from this? And another thing is, what haven't they liked in the past? So, they'll have naturally had experiences with leaders that haven't gone so well and perhaps haven't been given the opportunity to feed back on that. So it sounds slightly disarming and maybe uncomfortable for some people, but very early on, I'll ask them to give me feedback on things that I'm likely to get wrong. And by saying that quite early on, you kind of create a bit of a more, you're giving some vulnerability out, but measured, and it allows a space whereby immediately they feel comfortable to feedback. And it means that you get to the truth sooner, because as a leader, you need to get to the truth. Otherwise, really what you're basing decisions on is fallacy or assumption.
And therein is the risk, right? That's where risk gets created, or misalignment, or why aren't people moving quickly enough, or, why aren't they engaged with this or prioritizing it? All of those can be assumptions that are really unhelpful. And especially going in, it's lovely that you do that you go into a team and there's a humility about it as well, right? There's a reset opportunity and there's a willingness to be heard. And, measured vulnerability, I think, is really important, because as you probably know, I've got vulnerability that is measured is good, but vulnerability where it gives us relief because we can say whatever we want and share our worries with people is not helpful to team members. And that is kind of part of your role, is to create clarity, not to create some confusion, because that creates risks. So yeah, I really like that, because it speaks to the power dynamics, right? You coming in, joining a team, leading that team, and people don't know you and they don't know what they can talk to you about. They don't know how you operate.
Well, I mean, in truth, especially in my role, I'm often parachuted into a situation. Sometimes as a contractor, the scene can be quite complex. It's lots of different stakeholders. I know very little, frankly, because I've only just joined. I could easily break stuff, which is not helpful. So unless you understand the people you're working with, then you're not going to be much good. So it really is critical for this role to actually have that mindset. The other thing is, and it's probably relevant to this, is blind spots. Now, people are more forgiving of blind spots, I'd say, when they know you. So you're up to the team for a while, friends and family. Yeah. They're gonna let these things off. You've got those perception and values, and they allow for it. You don't get that tolerance when you go into a new environment, especially as a leader. So you have to be careful and be aware, and once again, allow for people to feed back on those, because it's critical that you know quite quickly if something is rubbing someone up the wrong way, or why other people are rubbing up each other up and the wrong way. Sorry to keep using that as an analogy, but it's critical you understand the dynamics of the situation, and to do that. This is key.
I think that's really smart and sound and respectful, right? Respectful of all the relationships that are existing there. What would you say has been in recent years sort of a big growth moment for you?
That's an interesting one. I think for me, first thing was my role had changed significantly. So I no longer needed to be the best doer. I needed to create the conditions for people to be the best. So that's a shift. And then it kind of comes back to my point before about sort of jumping to the solutions and relinquishing control. You have to have trust in the people that you work with. Otherwise, it's just not going to work. It's a different role completely. But the other thing is the fact that you can carry over some of the principles of this course and having good conversations and good leadership skills to clients as well. So quite quickly, I mean, if we use the course as an example, not long after I did it, I was then on a program, particularly problematic, really complex stakeholder dynamics. And I was using some of the phrases that I'd learnt in the meeting with the clients. Well, how do you feel about it? Amazing how it just reduced some of the animosity and we actually came to solutions by just using different phrases, which is just, before I'd done this and sort of practiced some of it, I wouldn't have thought that it could be that powerful.
It's those are the little surprises and the gems that are in the road, right? When you know what your role is in the conversation, in the meeting, right? And you have the awareness to notice where the friction is between people, or what's proving difficult to say, or is coming out awkward, right? And that's immensely valuable. Those are all like coaching skills that we can be applying outside of a one-to-one conversation, right? A growth meeting with a direct report. These are skills that we can use in every instance of our day, right? Whether that's an interaction with the team, a stand-up, a client checkpoint, whatever it is, right? There's value in applying that ability to notice and observe what's going on around the table, right? Where's the energy getting stuck, and to be able to ask about it. And it's not a question many people ask, is how do you feel about it? But
Tell me more. I've been using that all the time.
Yeah.
I think the other thing as well that I found incredibly valuable and have carried through and it feels relevant to this are the values. So I think one of the first exercises we did on the course was to work out our values from a whole selection. And I'll be honest with you, I can't remember how we got to those three, but they meant a lot to me by the time we got there. And I now use those in framing nearly every conversation I have. So mine were curiosity, empathy, and candour. And I found that they actually complement one another, especially in the current landscape. And I tend to, in fact, it's even got to a point now where if those values, so because I apply them to every conversation and they all have their own strengths, I should probably just explain them in more details because it helps with the sort of following point. But so candour is obviously being honest in conversations and people knowing that you're being straight talking. You've got the curiosity element, which is what I mentioned before about the discovering, understanding people. And then the empathy is to try and obviously communicate those. Because if you are candid without empathy, then it's just brutal. So you they complement one another.
Yes.
And I think now, though, especially the longer you have leadership roles, the more you start to look at the leadership within the organization that you're in, and you start to see whether your values actually align with the way that they're taking an organization. And that I found enlightening because, I mean, frankly, sometimes you just can't unsee it when it jars, which is probably just a maturity of, becoming a more experienced leader. I hope it is that anyway, but it makes me more considered about the places that I want to work and the environments I want to be in, because you have an opinion once you become more leader and you want to see those values carried through. So yeah, it's a growth opportunity and it's been quite a fascinating journey, actually.
Well, because now you see yourself as a guardian of the culture that you operate in, right? The culture for your team and what that allows team members to be able to contribute or do. And I think once you start to appreciate the importance of what you stand for and how that plays out for you and how it shows up, and the more personal evidence you have of why that works for you because of the results that you get, the connections that you make with team members, the respect that you encourage, it's so rewarding. It's very hard to walk away from it. And like you say, when you see something quite counter to that, where there has been a breach of trust or values are being compromised extensively, it does make it a difficult place to be. But also, I think it helps ground you even more to know what's important to you and how you want to show up, right? And that's the sense I'm getting from you. It's become really important for you. And it's quite a grounding position to be, is to feel like I know exactly what my role is here and I know how I want to show up.
Yeah, I think so. I think leaders have to do that now, especially in the current climate and the way that the landscape's changed. AI has changed everything, and that's not something to be scared of, but conversations are almost more important now. The tools are really for the work. You need to protect the conversation so that you can bring the human element back into it. And I think, what I think I'm finding interesting is that AI is exposing the leadership culture within big organizations.
Yes.
And the expectation of some leaders is that actually, because AI obviously improves efficiency and productivity, but the demand is also getting higher. And some leadership teams are using any capacity created by the efficiency of tools to have more conversations and bring the human elements back in. I would say that some organizations are not doing that. They're just expecting more, and actually conversations are being shrunk. And then you start to question, well, are we really asking the right questions of the stuff we're getting out of the tools? Because the tools aren't responsible.
Right. Yes.
And I think that's this is probably a bigger conversation, bigger question, but there's stuff there that needs to be considered, I think, from a leadership point of view.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I laugh there because I hear that so strongly, and I can relate it to the work that I do and the conversations that I'm in, is because of the speed of it. To me, there's a fragmentation that I feel people are experiencing, leaders are experiencing, team members are experiencing. For the very fact that with AI, whatever your level of involvement is, you've probably got multiple threads of thoughts or explorations going on in addition to the work that you're there to deliver, right? And it's very easy to get caught up in all of that and stop having the really important conversations about how people are doing. And because the excitement or the busyness or the fear of not being relevant or not being competitive and so on is driving a lot of behaviors that are not necessarily healthy and or productive or actually moving you in the right direction. And I feel like, I'd love your take on this. I feel like leaders are struggling to create an approach or a way of prioritizing what's important because the opportunities have suddenly just kind of mushroomed. There's too many options, too many possibilities. And how do you contain them all? How do you determine which thread is the most important or the most valuable? And how do you help your team manage their time, manage themselves through that?
Yeah, I think this is the fundamental problem at the moment, that leaders are attempting to answer all of those questions and nobody really knows. And because every day AI is evolving and changing, even down to new releases of new versions of Claude that completely transform everything and triple the speed in a day. There's no way a human can keep up with that. But I think coming back to those grounded values actually does help to a certain extent. It doesn't help with prioritizing what necessary to focus on, but it helps with how you communicate to teams. Because, if I look at the three that I mentioned, being candid with your team so that you may not have the answers because things are moving too quickly, but you can be honest about that and tell them what you do know. I think saying that confidently will at least reassure them that you're doing everything you can. You're communicating what you do know rather than, letting the anxiety come through that you might be, because you've got to shield your teams, right? Because everybody's feeling a little bit anxious. Especially in terms of jobs, people are losing jobs in the industry because companies are trying to invest in the AI tools without necessarily calculating whether there's real efficiency there and whether those humans are going to be needed. So obviously there's uncertainty. And I think as a leader, you need to protect your team from that. But in reality, you may not have the answer. So I think, being candid. If you say you're going to go off and research something, find out more, deliver on that. Know that you're trusted and can actually follow through. And actually, sorry, I am playing on my three values, but curiosity. So be that leader that actually is going out there and discovering things and not just being told. Because if you're waiting to be told by especially the organization you work for, it's already old news. So you need to be going out there, discovering what's out there, the latest information, what's valuable for your team, and then relaying what's actually valuable to your team back and empathizing with their situation. You probably, as a leader, are already experiencing some of the concerns that your team are, but really understand and empathize with their position and just understand that this is it's an exceptional time, but there are a lot of opportunities there. So there's nothing wrong with leaning into it and encouraging your teams to do so. But yeah, I don't know if I answered all your questions. I didn't know if I tracked all of them, but I think, that's kind of that's my take on this. But yeah, the speed is just the conversations and the human side are so critical now. And as I said before, my worry is that leaders are forgetting that and need to come back to the core principles.
I want to pull on the role of leaders actually, doing the research and understanding the space and to be able to guide their team in a useful way and come back to it. Because some of the conversations I'm in, I know first of all, there is a lack of knowledge about how to even apply or make good use of AI on a basic daily operational level by senior leaders. And because their role has been to lead and direct and be at the front line connecting with customers and clients. And so they're not as close to the technology as perhaps they once were. And so I am aware that there is this fear among senior leaders of not knowing the technology well enough and not being able to speak into it. And there is that fear. And so as a result, they just don't, or they default to other people, but they miss the opportunity to inject some wisdom, some experience, some pragmatism that comes with experience. And so they need to be speaking into that space. They need to be aware so that they can make informed contributions or guide their team effectively. And I'm wondering, what are you seeing and what's your position on that? I mean, clearly it is go away and find out, but what advice would you give leaders to help overcome that fear of not knowing?
It's interesting because it has parallels with what I mentioned before about the shift in terms of when I first moved into line management, I realized my role had changed. Senior leaders need to understand their role has now changed, and AI has enforced that. And maybe some leaders haven't had to shift their style for so long that they're now scared of the unknown. They just have to invest the time. They can't rely on other people telling them what to do. Having said that, and that'd be contrary to what I was saying earlier, you do have to trust the people around you and trust the people, not necessarily the tools, because they are tools, right? And they can be incredibly valuable. I'm far from being anti-AI. In fact, I've been doing some AI consultancy very recently with some leaders who are discovering such things that you've described. But it's just about investing the time to understand and staying on trend. And it just means splitting your time. And actually, this kind of also tallies up with something else that I observed around learning on the course. So it's almost like leaders who coach actually trained me to stop being the person that answers questions. But as years before AI made that inevitable. So, there's been such a shift that in terms of how I have moved away from attempting to answer questions. And I think that's the same for senior leaders. The tools now exist with lots of different answers, but they need to nitpick through in terms of what is relevant to their business and have the right people around them to continually research, because time is obviously precious for a senior leader. So to your point, that's fine if they are relying on others and other people around them in their team are upskilling, but they can't just trust they can't trust those individuals or the tool entirely. They have to be experienced in that field. And I think especially leaders who have been great at doing their job, and then they've become a leader who's got line management, and then they've continually gone down that path of that level of knowledge. AI is so much broader. It's like learning a completely different skill. So, and if you don't learn that, you are going to be left behind. I don't know yeah.
It's a judgment. That's kind of what I'm picking up is there's the relevance of experienced leaders is the ability to make certain quality judgments that if they're not in it, then they can't be that contributor. And the other thing that I think is also shifting and I'm hearing from you a little bit is collaboration is changing. The collaboration is happening. It's happening faster. There are more voices in that collaboration. And I feel like you have to, as a leader, kind of drop down a little bit into the detail in order to be able to maintain your relevance and be a useful contributor and bring your judgment to it. And I suspect there's a certain amount of friction in having to sort of drop down into and learn a skill, learn something new in order to effectively contribute. But it feels like the nature of contribution is changing too, because now we have AI in the mix. So you can have a problem that you need to solve, but you can go to AI first, and play around with and stress test or come up or brainstorm ideas, for example, at a basic level in terms of, idea generation and strategizing. And then if many of you are able to do that, and then when you come together and have a discussion, it just means that the mix is vaster, it's quicker, it's kind of covered way more ground in a shorter space of time. So when you're coming together, a lot of the thinking that we might have done as a team has already happened. And so how then do you move forward? Is that an advantage or is that a disadvantage because maybe some team members have moved on beyond others way quicker? And is there a risk of a disconnect? I don't know, I'm thinking out loud here, but this feels like a lot of the conversations that I'm hearing and there's definitely a big shift happening in the way that we work because AI is in the mix.
Definitely. I think but as you said, it's an accelerator. And that's why conversation is so key though, because in this scenario where you've set a task, a number of people have gone off and collated the findings for that. If they've all used LLM tools, there may be some consistency there. Now, AI companies would like to tell you that it's all very individual. It depends on the prompts. There is that to a certain extent, but it's all pulling from the same data source. So then I think as a leader, you need to be the one that masters the questions, that the content comes together, but what does that mean to us? What does that mean to the product or the service that we're offering? What does that mean to our customers? You've got to have the right, and just to delve in, the tell me more that I mentioned earlier, you need to go a layer lower than maybe you would have done previously. But having a toolkit of questions to handle those scenarios is where a leader can show their strengths. So it's critical. It's all about conversations now. And it's an interesting time because it's an accelerator. You can get to that point where you can ask those questions sooner, and there's nothing wrong with that.
No, it's but I think, as you say, it's leaders understanding this new role, the shape of and the flavor of what they're there to do, and how they can best support their teams rather than seeing it as a fearful thing that they're anxious about. And not knowing enough. The key message, which is that the conversations are super important now more than ever, right? Couple of questions.
I made a couple of notes. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
No, have a look at your notes in case there's something that you feel like we didn't touch on.
Yeah, I was trying not to look during the meeting. The advice to younger self.
Yes.
That might be relevant.
Yeah.
Yes, we could do that one because I think that would be quite a nice thing to,
wrap up on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Obviously, if you've got questions, I can answer those. Let me know when we're starting.
I did want to ask, what are the hardest questions you've become better at?
That's a good
opinions on that.
Yeah, I do. So
let me ease you into that. I'll ask you that question. So we've been talking about how the role of leadership is changing and how we kind of have to find a way to get into that space. But I'm wondering what perhaps have been the hardest conversations to have that you've gotten better at over time?
Yes. Okay. So it's a good question. And it's something that it's possibly actually a secret driver for why I got into wanting to find my style in the first place, I suppose. And that's first one would be having those conversations, sort of managing upwards and having the more challenging conversations with people further up the chain. So whether that's a project sponsor or whether that's a client. I think before I'd matured into a leader and practiced some of the techniques, I would probably shy away from some of those, or I would soften it so much that the point would be lost. And so I think that is something that I've got better at. If you take a tricky conversation as an example with a project sponsor and the project's going off track, just go with the facts. This is where we are. This is my opinion. And then coming back to having the right questions, what's your opinion? And between you can then work your way forward. There's no point in shying away from that. So I think that's probably one of them. And then the other one that stands out to me would be performance feedback to people that you really like. And that is a tricky one. And there were times where in the past I could lose sleep over, how am I going to deliver that? How are they going to be all right with that news? And once again, this is, you have a role, you're in a professional position and you are a leader. So you need to guide those individuals. They need that feedback. If you're not direct and clear with that feedback, it's almost like slow cruelty or, it's like a slow torture. Sorry. It's don't just beat around the bush and leave them doing a certain behavior that's actually having a detrimental effect to themselves and their career. Nip it in the bud and talk to them. And I think I've got better at that now. Don't dress it up and just provide it because people will appreciate it. Vagueness isn't great. So yeah, those are the two that stand out.
I think they're great ones because what often sits in those spaces is I don't want to offend. I don't want them to take it the wrong way. I don't want them to react badly. And so we're anticipating all the emotions that they might have in receiving the information we're giving them. But we can still, to your point, one of your values, candor, you can deliver honestly the truth about a situation without it being rude, uncaring, and just aggressive, right? It doesn't have to be. But I think we are so flooded with, if you're not grounded, if you don't know how you navigate through these conversations, it can just fall out. Whatever you say can fall out. And that's what we worry about is, I'm going to say it and it's going to be terrible. Or I'm not going to be in control of the conversation. I'm going to lose control of the conversation. Or we feel so strongly about something that it does come off rude. And that's not helpful either. But it's understanding, as you say, it's not helpful to them. The kindest thing is to give some information or feedback truthfully, but we don't have to be unpleasant people to do it, right? We don't have to make it a horrible experience. It can actually be quite a strengthening of relationships if we do it well.
I think, and every personality type is different. Some people really relish honesty. Some people say they do, and actually, in truth, you have to be very careful about how honest you are. But everybody ultimately wants to be better, don't they? They want to improve, and the only way they can is if people provide them with feedback. It's just how you handle it, and when you do it, as you say, you could be, if you to get it wrong, you can be rude about it. If you leave it too long, you might have to be slightly firmer when you could have actually just had a conversation early and it wouldn't have become a problem. So timing is key.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad those are things that you feel more comfortable and don't shy away from, but actually gravitate towards, because you know that you can do it. You know that you can be in that space for somebody. Brilliant. Dan, the time has gone really quickly. I've really enjoyed catching up with you.
Always a pleasure.
Yeah, been really, really lovely. My last question to you, if I may, is what would be key advice that you might give to your younger self or to someone stepping into a leadership role?
Wow. I mean, if I could go back in time, I would say prepare them for the future and how much change is coming. But obviously, that's impossible. What would I say to another person just getting out into this, or an aspiring leader? So your job has changed, firstly. So stop trying to be the best person at delivering the work. Don't question whether you need to still prove that. Your job now is, a big part of it is going to be about creating the right conditions for other people to do well. And that is a shift. And don't shy away from that. Just get straight on with it. And the other one would be, I think I touched on this earlier, but it'd be more about sort of asking more than you tell. So, listening and creating the space, giving them, the opportunity to respond and, in a way where they really open up and you get to the truth. The other thing is, and this is what I was looking for when I first met you, Sehaam, is understanding style. And I was sort of jumping around in terms of the best way to approach this. Just own it. Find a style that fits you and your personality and allows you to be yourself. And that will work for your team. If you try and be someone else, it's obvious and unnatural, and it'll actually hold you back. So yeah, those would be the three.
That's brilliant to hear, because it is about style. And I think there's a distinction here, isn't there? Previously we have had styles that the command and control style or variations of it. And the beautiful thing about using coaching skills is it doesn't dictate your style, but it facilitates it and allows you to honor your values and how you want to show up in a really genuine way. So it's nice to hear you say that. So yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Dan. It's been fantastic. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for inviting me on.
Thank you for talking with me today, Dan. I've enjoyed kicking around some leadership challenges and approaches in what's a fascinating time for leadership. Okay. You will find details of how to get in touch with Dan in the description below. If you enjoyed today's episode, please let me know with a like, comment, and share. And if you want more content like this, then be sure to subscribe to the Leaders Who Coach podcast. How are you adjusting your leadership style in this turbulent AI landscape? Are things feeling fragmented, or are you clear about your role and direction? and how you can guide your team. Because now more than ever, you need to be super grounded as leaders. That means knowing yourself and what you stand for, as we've talked about today, the values you're protecting, and how to involve your team more in problem solving appropriately and creating accountability. This is exactly where having coaching skills as a leader can make all the difference. Less stress, more influence. That's what we want. Take a look at Leaders Who Coach AI Enhanced. Find the Leaders Who Coach app in the App Store and on Google Play. Download it for free and start your subscription with a 7-day free trial, and you can cancel anytime. See you there or here on the Leaders Who Coach podcast next time.